Hey everybody, welcome back for another video. So today is the day I'm going to just do it. This is my top 10 best things I read in 2022. So we are well into January, I'm aware, but man, this list was really difficult for me to make because I read so many good books in 2022. So I toiled over my list. I gotta say my top 5 or so, it's been in lock for several weeks now. But it is difficult to structure a top 10 that I feel really comfortable with because no matter what, guys, I am leaving off some amazing books. So yeah, I'm gonna have some honorable mentions and stuff, but this is my list. I'm sticking with it, and in the end, I'm really comfortable with it and really happy with it. So I'm gonna go over a couple of my personal rules because everybody's got a list, you know, their top 10 favorite things or best things they read in 2022. In order for me to come around to a list that I was really happy with, I had to put some stipulations and rules in there to make it easier for myself and just to make it all make sense for me. So here's what I did. Pretty common, I'm not doing any duplicate authors. So any given author can only show up on this list one time. And I did that because, like, spoiler alert early on, we all know that I had a very Robin Hobb heavy year and that I absolutely loved it. Like, I am obsessed with what she writes. And so I read a lot of Robin Hobb books this month, and if I didn't have this rule in place, I would guess about 6 or 5 of these top 10 books would be Realm of the Elderlings books. And that would be not very fun for you guys to watch because I want this video to be a good representation and sampling of everything I read last year. So any given author can only show up once per the list. Another thing is no rereads included. Because if I had let myself put rereads on there, guys, I reread 3 of my favorite A Song of Ice and Fire books this year. It would be a lot of Robin Hobb and a lot of George R.R. Martin. So no rereads. Also, you may have mentioned, I've used the term favorite thing. I am going to give slots to series. Now, I know that's kind of cheating, but I'm going to say properties such as, you know, using A Song of Ice and Fire as an example. Series count as 1. But to make it fair and to make me have to narrow it down, if I choose a series for a slot, I will pick my favorite book from the series to represent the slot. So we will, you know, for example, if I was using A Song of Ice and Fire as my favorite thing I read this year, the number 1 slot, I would make myself pick my favorite A Song of Ice and Fire book to take the slot. Does that make sense? So I am going to make myself narrow it down. Just know that the slot belongs to the whole series. And along the same lines of my favorite thing I read, what that means to me personally is, did it stick with me? There is a big difference, in my opinion, of best things I read versus favorite things I read. That would probably look like some different lists. But coming from me, favorite means, do I still think about it today? Were there passages that moved me? And emotional does not always mean crying, by the way. Did I get attached? Does that world, do those characters, does that story still mean something to me now? Do I think about it consistently? You know, did it change the way I think about things? Did it really, you know, take me a while to like move on from the story? Not every book hits that way, and that's okay. Because a lot of these things on my honorable mentions are amazing books. They're books that I will recommend to people. They're books that I had so much fun reading. They're books that I think are very, very good and entertained me to the fullest. But they didn't have, or maybe they just lacked just enough of that, just something extra special to make it really sit with me and be impactful with me as a favorite. So don't be upset if something that you loved or you were like, oh, I thought you liked that, doesn't end up on this list, because this list to me is a very specific type of favorite. So I hope this makes sense to you. For me, it's what worked in my brain and allowed me to move forward. I love making lists and I love ranking things, but I take it way too seriously. Like, I always put way too much of myself in my list. So here it is, and have fun watching. I hope you like it. All right, for number 10, I chose Fire and Blood by George R.R. Martin. There it is. So this was my first time reading it. A lot of people who I read this alongside of, they had already read it once before, and they were revisiting it before the beginning of the show. I am a Song of Ice and Fire fan. I read all the books. I love Game of Thrones. Westeros is my favorite fantasy world, but I had never read this. And so I picked it up. I mean, I've owned it for a while actually, but I picked it up before the show was going to air because while I had a pretty good working knowledge of the history of Westeros because of, what do we call this book up here? Yeah, because of the World of Ice and Fire. I have that book up there, that big illustrated one, and I love it. I had a pretty good working knowledge just because of being so close to the fandom for so long. But I'd never read this, so I picked it up so I could refresh myself on the storyline that was going to be covered in House of the Dragon. And I really liked this. I wasn't sure what to expect because I knew that it was sort of a historical text and a retelling of the history from a few different perspectives. I thought it had potential to be interesting, of course, but I didn't know that I would be so entertained by this. Like somehow, even though it does have a structure that is somewhat dry, or it could be, if anyone else had written it, it still had a way to capture the voice of the narrator, the person or people who are telling the story back through historical text. It still had a way of capturing personality and being really charming or being really heavy emotionally or just really conveying exactly what I would want out of a novel, but through this fictional historical text, I was still able to be completely enamored, locked in, and entertained. So it was so good to get back to Westeros and read something that I had never read before, and I just absolutely loved my time with it. So that's my number 10 favorite thing I read all year. For number 9, this one surprises me a lot. For everyone watching, you're probably not surprised because, as I always say, usually things that are popular for a reason. I don't know why this one caught me off surprise. But for number 9, I am going to say the Kingkiller Chronicles, and particularly I will choose The Wise Man's Fear over Name of the Wind. I really, really liked this story, you guys. I love the way Patrick Rothfuss writes, but also I was very, very intrigued with the main character, the slow build of all the mystery. Like some things are big questions that are presented right in the beginning, but as the story is crafted, more questions are asked. And I have a feeling because of the clever way he is presenting the mysteries and the story slowly there's, the main story that you're following, but then there's a big story underneath. The way that it is being so cleverly presented to me, I know that this is going to have a very satisfying and one-of-a-kind resolution when and if we ever get that third book. So I was hesitant for years to read this series because it is famously unfinished, but I have no regrets over reading The Name of the Wind and The Wise Man's Fear this year because I really, really liked them, and they're my number 9 favorite thing I read all year. For number 8, I chose Us Against You, or more specifically, the Beartown Trilogy by Frederick Backman. So I actually read the original book, Beartown, in 2021, so it can't be considered for this list. But I read both Us Against You and then the new release, The Winners, in 2022, and I really loved them both. I don't have enough good things to say about the Beartown Trilogy. If you think you know what it's about, or you have an inkling of where it's going to go, put that aside and just try book 1 and read them. I loved this series. It had so much emotional weight and depth, but it's not all sadness. Like, this series makes you feel good, but it also makes you feel bad. It makes you feel happy and it makes you feel sad. It covers all the emotions, but what is so special about this is how authentic and real it feels. He has a way of describing how things feel that make you go, that, I've never been able to put that in words, but that's exactly how that emotion feels, or that's exactly what that type of memory feels like. He just explores the human condition unlike any other author I've ever read. So, like I said, I read 2 of these books this year, and The Winners, or the conclusion, the final book, was also really, really excellent. And I'm probably the minority here, but I think I slightly preferred Us Against You over The Winners, but that's kind of a coin toss because they were both so good. So when I read Beartown, I originally thought, why are there more books that follow this? Because the first book was so good, it feels like it stands alone fine. Like, why are there more? It felt like the story had been told. And sure enough, as soon as I read that next book, I thought, that's why, because that story needed to be told also. So if you're at all hesitant, you don't think that maybe Backman will be a genre you enjoy or the type of writing you like, you should pick out Backman. Honestly, I might suggest starting with a different one. Message me and I'll tell you. But either way, start with Beartown, and if you want more, there's more. If you're not crazy about it, or you felt like it was enough, you don't want to get tied into a trilogy, then stop at Beartown. But I'm here to tell you that the story that comes after that original installation is so good, and it's absolutely one of my favorite things I read all year. For number 7, I chose Kingdoms of Death by Christopher Rocchio. This is book 4 of the Sun Eater series, and it was another absolutely gorgeous installation. So in 2022, he had 2 Sun Eater books that came out. One came out at the very end of the year, towards the middle of December, and I actually didn't finish it until January this month of 2023. So I'm not counting it towards my top 2022 list, but even if I were, I still think I would rank this one a little over Ashes of Man, book 5, because I just really enjoyed this novel. It has some interesting pacing. There was a few times where I wasn't quite sure where it was going or how I was going to feel about it, but in the end, this book has some of the most devastatingly exciting high highs and some of the most like world-rocking low lows. And the way he writes in this book, I mean, he continues to impress me and grow as an author through each book, but I think he has some of his most gorgeous writing in this book, especially the latter half. And there are passages in this book that I think about all the time. Like, they absolutely moved me. The way he put words to paper, the way he just told this stage of life that Hadrian is in the latter half of this book. It was poignant, it was beautiful, it was moving, and it's something that will really stick with me. So congratulations on 2 new releases in 2022. So at the beginning of the year, I partook in a read-along for Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn by Tad Williams. It was 1 book a month, but for that final book, we split it up into 2 months because it is huge. And that huge, chunky boy is going to be my number 6 favorite thing I read all year. So when this book was originally published, because it is enormous, it was broken up into 2 parts. So for the sake of the list, I'm going to say 2 Green Angel Tower Part 2 is my 6th favorite thing I read all year. I really loved my time in Austin Ard and the whole Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn trilogy. I love this type of fantasy. Like, it just checked all the boxes. It had characters that I find to be incredibly memorable and just people you want to root for. Bad guys, good guys, and lots of mystery and just like classic fantasy goodness mixed in. This is something that will go down as a favorite fantasy series for me. I absolutely will reread it again, but that second half of this last book was just so awesome to me. I loved the way that everything was wrapped up and concluded, and the heartstrings moments and the sadness, the loss, but also all the victories and payoff. Oh, it was so good. I love a good conclusion, and that is a great example. And that's why it's definitely one of my favorite things I read all year. So the first half of that list is hard to rank because, you know, on one day I'm thinking, oh, this should have been number 6. And I'm like, oh, maybe I should swap this out. And this could be an honorable mention. And this could be number 10. But when it comes to my top 5, I had no lost sleep here. Like, these are in lock and I feel very comfortable with my ranking. So I hope I can convey how much they meant to me and how much I enjoyed them. So you guys will hopefully pick them up too. My number 5 favorite thing I read all year was The Dark Tower by Stephen King. I'm holding up here The Drawing of the Three, and it is hard for me to pick a favorite Dark Tower book because there was things I liked about so many. Well, there's things I liked about all of them, but there's probably 3 that I could make a strong argument for being my favorite Dark Tower books. But every time I think about the Dark Tower, and I remember some of my favorite moments, so many of them happen in this book, number 2, The Drawing of the Three. And also, this is where I'm really introduced to all my favorite characters and the concept of the quartet. So I really liked this. Now, this is not a perfect series. This isn't even a series that I would recommend broad strokes to everyone, but it hit so many of the right notes for me. And even the parts that just really frustrated me or made me roll my eyes or made me want to chuck the book across the room, in the end, I still can't help but smile when I think about it. I still can't help but get excited when I think about some of those crazy moments or just bold choices that he made. So this, again, will be something I revisit in the future. It requires a reread, I do believe. It was bizarre. It was very Stephen King at his most out there, but man, it was good. It was so good, and I loved it. So thank you everyone who read this with me during the read along. Thank you, Scott, for hosting it. Thank you, Mike, for always being so enthusiastic and encouraging me to get to this, because I love it. Like, this is a part of me now. Like, these are friends that I will have forever. This series kind of came out of nowhere for me, but I loved the Warlord Chronicles by Bernard Cornwell. I did a review about it, and what can I say? These books were just so good to me. So I am holding up Excalibur, which is book 3. So I will call officially Excalibur my number 4 favorite thing I read all year. But honestly, I loved the whole trilogy. The first book did take me a little while to feel like I was jiving with it, to click, to feel like I cared or was invested. That might sound a little bit harsh, but it did. That's just the truth. It took me a minute to completely feel comfortable with it and like I was enjoying myself. But once I did, it was a shift, it was a click, and all of a sudden I was just like, wait, am I loving this? And from that point on, I had the best time. I love the way he writes medieval slice of life. I love the way he writes fight and action scenes, which I don't always love. Not everyone can pull it off for me. The narration was absolutely out of this world, and just the different perspective he gave us on the Arthurian legend was, I think, really realistic and just phenomenal fun. So please check this out. I loved this series, and it's easily one of my favorite things I read all year. Swan Song by Robert McCammon was so fun to read. Now, this is a humongous book. In fact, it is about 900 pages in this edition. It is a very long audiobook. There are a lot of characters. It covers a lot of ground. A lot happens. But never at any point did this feel like a long or slow book. This has an amazing pace. It has an amazing cast of characters and a really unique perspective that he gives somebody from every camp and every walk of life and every perspective a POV. And not often do you get in the mind of bad guys. And this book has it all. It has despicable villains. It has amazing protagonists. It has found family. It has chosen one. It has evil. It has good. It has horror. It has adventure. Like, I had so much fun with this book, and it is one that I'm like, who wouldn't like this book? Like, maybe I need to read it again and be a little more discerning, but in my mind, I can't think of a single person who would pick this up, read it from cover to cover, and not immediately rank it as one of their favorite books ever. I thought it was so good. On the same rule real quick, I did not include Boy's Life on this list. Boy's Life is another Robert McCammon book that I read and absolutely loved, so we will consider an honorable mention, because I wasn't quite having a hard time choosing, because I do rank this above Boy's Life, but please, guys, I loved Boy's Life too. If you want to test and taste for Robert McCammon's writing style, but you don't necessarily want to start with something that's almost 1,000 pages long, then pick up Boy's Life, because I mean, it is so good as well. I definitely want to mention it on this list. But this right here, Swan Song, one of my favorite books ever. I'm so glad that Mike encouraged me to read this and made it a priority, because I had a great time with this. One of my favorite books ever, and I'm so glad I read it this year. All right, for number 2, it is Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. So my copy of Lonesome Dove is actually still with my husband, because he's still reading it a little bit every day when he has downtime at work. So I have here a different Larry McMurtry book, and we're just going to hold it up and pretend like it's Lonesome Dove. So I read Lonesome Dove in 2022, and not only is it my number 2 favorite thing I read, easily, but it is probably one of my favorite books ever. And it's just pretty cool to, in one year, read so many new favorite books. Like, I mean everything I said about Swan Song. I've never made a top 10 favorite books list, like, period, ever of all time. I could do it, but it might kill me. But how lucky am I that this year I definitely read at least 3 books that will be all-time favorites, and Lonesome Dove is one of them. It absolutely deserves all of the accolades and hype that come with this title, because it's just one of the best novels ever written. It has to be. It is a story about a cattle drive led by some retired Texas Rangers, and they're driving cattle from the south to the north. It is slice of life, Western, early America days, okay? It sounds boring. It should be, but nothing about this book ever lost my interest. It has some of the best character work I've ever read. It has some of the best dialogue, some of the best, I don't want to say arcs, because these people are just people, and most people in their lives don't have I started out as a bad guy and then I went on my journey and learned my lesson and now I'm good. That's not realistic, but this has realistic slices of these people's life that you go with them on this journey, and you do get to watch them grow, but in some instances you watch them stay the same, and sometimes it's to their detriment and sometimes it's because they're being true to themselves. But these characters were just absolutely, they're perfect because they're so imperfect and human. And I love the way he writes. I love the way the story unfolded. I loved every moment I spent with this crew. So if you're at all on the fence about this book because it's not your genre, or you think it might be overhyped, or you've heard that it's slow, all I can say is find out for yourself, because it would make me sad if somebody thought that about any of those things about this book. But I would understand it, because on paper, maybe that's true, but I was just in love with it from the beginning until the end, and it's something that I will cherish forever. Absolutely one of my favorite books. Before we move on to number 1, I do want to do a couple of honorable mentions. And first and foremost, I want to talk about The Lonesome Crown by Brian Lee Durfee, because I was so hyped for this book this year. I did a reread of The Forgetting Moon and The Blackest Heart, which are huge books. I read them earlier back in 2020 and I loved them, but leading up to this big new release, I absolutely wanted to refresh myself, because these are the kind of books you need to refresh yourself on, because there are so many moving parts. So I reread both of them, loved them even more the second time, and then I have been reading The Lonesome Crown Book 3 for like a month and a half now. I am not doing very well with making progress in it. But trust me when I say that it's not because the book isn't interesting or good or even like amazing, because it's all of those things. If I had finished it, we'll see how I feel about it after I finished it, because I still have about 40% left. But I have a feeling that if I had finished it within the calendar year, it would be somewhere on this list, because it is rocking my face off. Like, it's so good. So my apologies to Brian for procrastinating and not giving him his spot on this list, because I'm loving this book and I definitely think it would have been on this list had I had finished it. So we'll talk about it come 2023. There are a couple of more series that I want to make sure I mention in this section, because I really, really enjoyed them. I absolutely recommend them. I have nothing but great things to say about them. They just didn't quite make the cut for my top 10. And that would be The Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee, Nevernight by Jay Kristoff, Hunger of the Gods, new release by John Gwynne, The Legend of Blackjack by A.R. Witham, and also I read a couple more Jack Carr books that go with the Terminalist series, and they were also super excellent. So definitely check those out, and please don't take me not including them on this list to mean that I didn't enjoy them, because I have awesome stuff to say about all of those series as well. Alright, it is time for the number 1 slot, and surprising absolutely no one, I have chosen The Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb. So as you guys know, in 2021 I read all of Farseer and I really enjoyed it. I knew it was something special and I really liked what was being set up, but I wasn't necessarily in a huge hurry to get back to it. I just figured here and there I would knock out a sub-series here, a sub-series there, and it would be something I read in accumulation over the next several years. Well, in spring of 2022, I read The Live Ship Traders, which is the second sub-series in all of The Realm of the Elderlings. and I was obsessed. Like, you guys remember, if you've been watching my channel this year, you know this was the year of Hob. I loved Live Ship Traders. And as I was reading it, I thought, this is the best trilogy I've ever read. It doesn't get any better than this. After that, a couple months later, I read Tawny Man, and again was just like, oh, so good. It felt great to be back with the original cast of characters, and just a very tight, amazing trilogy that was just moved me. It stuck with me. I've never cried so hard in a book, and I felt so just, I mean, it was such a beautiful story, and it felt almost like a conclusion. So then I read the Warlord Chronicles, which is the ugly stepchild of the Realm of the Elderlings. It doesn't get any respect. No one really likes it, except for me. So I really liked it, you guys. Like, I do think it's my least favorite of the whole series. I can understand why people don't like parts of it, but honestly, don't even worry about it. It was not nearly as bad as people made it out to be. And in fact, the last two books, because it is of course the only quartet, there's 5 sub-series, and there's 4 trilogies and 1 quartet. I liked the last 2 books of that quartet quite a bit. So would they make this top 10 list? Probably not. But don't go into it thinking you're going to have to hate rate it, because honestly, I liked that quartet as well. But then we got to Fitz and the Fool, which is the final trilogy, and I was in love. I don't know what to tell you guys. I've never read anything better, I don't think. So for my slot, I am going to pick the final book in the entire series, and that is Assassin's Fate, the final book of the Realm of the Elderlings. And it was unlike any other experience I've ever had. Like, I don't want to overhype. I don't want to sound dramatic. But this book was unlike any other experience I've ever had when it comes to reading. Because she managed to so artfully make every other book that you've read in this series matter more. You know, there's parts that you're like, oh, that wasn't my favorite, or that may have seemed slow, or I didn't get that, or what happened to that storyline? Nothing she set up doesn't matter. Nothing she wrote doesn't come back around in a meaningful way. This ending made everything better in hindsight. It was meaningful, it was emotional, it was satisfying, I'm just so content after finishing this. Everyone talks about Fitz and how she just is a murderer of emotions, and it's true. Like, you're gonna cry, you're gonna feel sad, you're going to wonder, you know, why do I put myself through this? But in the end, it is worth it. It's not just sad, it's satisfying, and it's beautiful, and it's really honestly the best completed book series I've ever read. And I think it's safe to say that Realm of the Elderlings is my favorite completed fantasy series. Probably my favorite book series of all time, maybe. I don't know, that's another list I need to work on, my favorite fantasy series of all time. But honestly, guys, I had the best time in the Realm of the Elderlings this year. And hands down, the Realm of the Elderlings, and specifically Assassin's Fate, but really, like I said, it would be 5 or 6 of these books, were my favorite thing I read all year. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Thank you for watching my channel and watching my journey through these books all year. I'm dying to hear what your favorite books were as well. So please leave your list below. Leave me all the comments. Let me know if there's something crazy I forgot, because that is something I would do. But yeah, let me know what you think, and tell me, are you planning to read any of these this year? Because if so, we gotta link up and we gotta have discussions, because these were amazing books and I just had the best year. Moving forward, if my top 10 lists are this difficult to narrow down, I will be eternally happy, because this was an amazing year of reading.